We have with us three excellent panelists who are authorities in their field and on the subject, and we're really lucky to be learning from them. So it's great to have you here, Sania, Cari, so everyone, let's get to know them. Sania is a leading economist and strategist focused on the intersection of technology and economics. She was formerly the chief economist at Eightfold AI, where she led the think tank. She focused on innovative research, providing insights into how AI is transforming the economy and reshaping work and the labor market. Sania has also served as a senior economist at the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. And she is currently, if I'm not wrong, cooking up something really interesting of her own. So welcome, Sania. Great to have you here. We also have Dr. Cari Miller, who is the head of AI governance and research at the Center for Inclusive Change. Cari specializes in the intersection of AI and DE, and B in employment and education applications. She co-founded the AI Procurement Lab, which is a women-led nonprofit that advances and modernizes procurement practices to ensure that AI systems are properly vetted before they're bought and deployed. Dr. Miller is also a member of the AMS Ethics Board, and as is very obvious, I think she is a great and very relevant person to have for this panel. So welcome, Dr. Cari. And last but not the least, we have Nadia Harris. Nadia is founder of remoteworkadvocate.com. She's an international expert on the future of work who specializes in remote work law and hybrid workplace solutions. She's also a university lecturer and author of numerous flexible working publications, which includes her own book. It's called How to Tackle Hybrid Working. We do have a lot of authors all across our panels today, which I really love. Just as an FYI. Nadia has experience working with global corporations like Volkswagen, Dell, Amazon, Airbus, Remote How, and she's been instrumental in enhancing compliance and scalability through innovative remote work strategies. So welcome, Nadia. It's amazing to have you three as our panel for today. And let's begin. Again, we have a poll on this screen to kind of understand what your current upskilling practices look like. Of course, because that's what we're all here for. That'll take a few seconds. And meanwhile, if you could also answer a quick question in the chat, what are the primary challenges that you all have encountered in implementing AI within your organization? While you write that, I'd love to cite a survey that we've actually been working on. A very, very recent survey that we conducted. The report will be out soon. And we asked people who were not using AI at work, mostly people from an HR background, why they were not using AI at work, what were their primary challenges, and almost 20% cited reasons around ethics, ethics, data privacy, bias, regulations, compliance. It turned out to be one of the major reasons. So yeah, let's have a look at the poll results. Okay, so people do have a bit of time, 1 to 2 hours per week. Splendid, cool. So let's move on. On the note of this being one of the major challenges of using AI at work, my first question will be to you, Dr. Miller. For your work at the Center for Inclusive Change, it focuses on the intersection of AI and DIB. So what are some of the best practices you recommend for ensuring that AI applications in HR are implemented ethically to prevent biases, to promote fairness, and to deal with this challenge?
It's a great question. First of all, I love the poll results. Great bell curve. Always appreciate a good bell curve. And thanks for hosting this today, by the way. So implementing ethically is interesting. We're going to talk a little bit about procurement, which is a slight passion of mine in a little bit. But I think first we need to recognize that there's two sides here. There's the developer side and the deployer side, so or the buyer side. And fundamentally, the developer side has much more control over the biases that might be seated inside of one of these systems. They make the decisions on how clean they get that data, how robust that data is when they're training these systems. And there's a spectrum of developers, there are some that are really serious about it and they take that job very seriously. And there are others that may not understand that as well. And so as the buyer receives these systems and purchases the system, you kind of get that handoff. So you have a job and the best practices on your side twofold, before the launch and after the launch, right? So before the launch, you absolutely want to understand what kind of sensitive information could be going into this so that you can create policy around that. Either you're allowing it or you're not allowing it based on what you agreed to. You want to double check those explainability statements, because if this is making a decision that could impact someone's livelihood or their career path, let's make sure the explainability statements make sense with the people who are actually going to use it. And then you want to make sure everyone's trained. When they're onboarded, they get trained. Maybe every year they get retrained, because that's a good way to prevent misuse and abuse. And then you're going to push that thing out into the wild, right? And so from there, they're like toddlers, right? We got to keep track. Where are they? What did they do? Did they go into the bathroom with someone? That's not allowed. Were they mean to someone? That's also not allowed. So we're going to keep track of the incidents. We're going to keep track of how many appeals we have to do, because if it's a bad decision, we got to fix it. We're going to set some parameters for the performance, because if we get too many bad incidents and appeals, we might need to turn that thing off. I know, sunk cost bias, yeah, but we do need to keep track. So those are just a few recommended best practices that I have in my little bag of tricks.
Sania, would you like to add on to that?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Dr. Miller just stated, but just to add to something, as AI continues to advance, developers bear this critical responsibility to really prioritize safety and alignment in their products. And so we should be holding them accountable. And, there's established methods that these AI developers are leaning into, like reinforced learning and constitutional AI. But then there's also other ones, and I'm getting really technical here, but I want you to look into these and ask the right questions to these AI developers, right? So there's like emerging research in areas like task decomposition, debate, weak to strong generalization, and they all present some really exciting possibilities about ethical AI. So I think really to ensure that companies are held accountable for developing safe and reliable AI, consumers really should actively engage in asking the right questions and really demanding transparency from these developers.
Thanks so much, Sania and Dr. Miller. That was really helpful. And Sania, I want to just continue with you. And given your background in navigating the intersection of economics and tech, how do you see, from a business perspective, how do you see businesses balancing the opportunities that AI present with ethical considerations that are necessary at this stage, as we've already brought out?
Yeah, I think great question, because it's really a dual impact. On the one hand, AI offers this tremendous opportunity for efficiency and innovation, and could fundamentally reshape not just industries and companies, but our work on a day-to-day basis. And so it's a really exciting future ahead, but there's also, on the flip side, plenty of uncertainty and complexity, since it presents such risks like job displacement and privacy concerns. And so there's a real important need for a thoughtful approach to this integration. So one thing that I'd like to talk about here is implementing AI responsibly, so that organizations that do use these tools and integrate them into their workflows are ensuring that the AI tools are used to enhance worker capabilities and not solely for just workforce reduction. Along the same lines, there is the responsible reorganization of human capital. So roughly, the statistics have said that about 1/3 of employees are going to be displaced because of AI in the next 5 years. about another third are going to have their jobs completely reorganized in the next 5 years. And then a whole 1/3 are going to see complete net new jobs. Those are rough estimates, but just to make the point that if we have AI to automate tasks, we have to also invest in upskilling of our human capital and reskilling so that we can leverage AI and humans and the benefits that both work would provide fully. So really training workers for high value roles that AI supports rather than just focusing on replacing folks would ensure career longevity and satisfaction.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. And just while we're talking about businesses, to kind of loop into the regulatory frameworks that they operate in. Nadia, I'd love for you to take a dab at this, especially because of your work as a remote work advocate and a lawyer, which gives you a unique perspective on regulatory challenges. So could you shed light on what the current framework governing AI and HR looks like right now, and how organizations can engage with it, deal with it, and work towards a future in that?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for this question. It's a very good question, and there is no straightforward response because of two things. The first one is there is no particular regulatory framework governing just AI for HR in particular, right? So there's not going to be one legal act, for example, where HR could go and say, oh, this is exactly how we are going to introduce AI within our organizations because this is the law. No, that makes things, of course, complicated, right? For HR from this perspective to figure out what should be taken into account. And also the second aspect is that, of course, there are regulatory frameworks. However, from a very holistic and global perspective, they don't refer to all countries at the same time, right? Because we have different jurisdictions. So it depends on which jurisdiction you are. I wish, of course, that in the future, this is wishful thinking, this is going to become more unified. It's essential because we live in a global village and AI is obviously used globally. However, what we have right now, and maybe some things to mention from an HR perspective, I always say it's this way that HR should be treating AI as a tool, right? And then if it's a tool, the question is, what do I need to follow in terms of regulations with this tool, right? And so, for example, we have anti-discrimination laws, right? Here we have the equal employment opportunity. It's really important when tools like AI recruitment tools, for example, are used, right? To make sure that there isn't going to be any bias. I probably will talk about it in during this session as well afterwards. We of course have GDPR, for example, in the EU, how data is being processed, right? Sensitive data, personal data. Of course, there is now, it's not currently implemented at that stage, but it shows that crucial aspects are being worked on. And I'm talking about the Algorithmic Accountability Act in the US, right? At the same time, there is also the EU AI Act, right? That looks at AI from different perspectives. From risk perspectives, right? It takes into account different risk factors. And then, of course, what is also important from an HR perspective is that particularly, well, not only in corporations, basically in almost all companies, we have ISO standards, right? And these ISO standards, so now this International Organization for Standardization, ISO, right? They're developing standards for AI. So that is also going to touch on all the policies that HR is using. So I would say when you look at HR, when you look at AI as a tool, think about all the aspects from a compliance perspective that HR needs to follow. And I think that this is also some kind of, I would say, hint for the future, especially why am I saying that AI is a tool? It's just because it doesn't have a legal personality. And this means that AI cannot be liable for any damage, right? A legal personality is a status that is granted to an entity or a person, an individual, right? Or can be a corporation. And it means that this legal personality, right? It gives certain rights and responsibilities, right? So that's the ability to enter, for example, into contracts, sue, be sued, and own property. Nowhere in the world AI at this stage has this legal personality, and it doesn't look like it's going to happen, which means that the people who use AI, right, should make sure that they conduct regular audits, they invest in training in HR and legal and their compliant teams to make sure that these individuals and these companies know exactly how to navigate these tools, taking into account current regulations.
Okay, yeah, that was already really deep. And Dr. Miller, I would actually love to go a little deeper into this with you, since Nadia has already spoken about ensuring compliance with current regulations that are different from region to region. What are some key considerations that organizations should keep in mind, like some pointers for compliance? And also, we will be launching a quick poll at this stage, just to understand what everyone's awareness about, regulations in their area is like. So you can feel free to, use that in your answer as well.
Yeah, she did a great job covering some of the big, huge laws that are out there, the overriding things that are like in play right now. ISO, I work on a couple of IEEE standards, IEEE. We're working towards those types of things as well. I think coming down the road, though, from a US perspective, the states are outpacing the federal government at like lightning speed. And so they're doing a number of things that's really just doesn't help. But I'll give you a little quick tour of what they're doing. So a lot of what they're doing is focusing on their own kingdoms, like, okay, we have citizens, we're using AI for ourselves. Let's make sure that's safe and responsible. Good, that's good. Outwardly, they are working on data. And we want to make sure that data stays private. Data, if you put it in, you should be able to get it out. You should know where it is. That's a big job. And each state just tweaks it a little bit, enough to be like, it's a lot to keep up with. I agree. But we have some systems out there that are doing a good job keeping track of that. So beyond that stuff, then we get into use cases. And that's where HR needs to really pay attention to what's going on. Governance comes down to the use case. And so a use case that's going to use facial expression or biometric data or, clock in, clock out data where you could be tracked in a certain way. Some states are addressing that. Some states are addressing, last year I saw a whole slew, I don't know who was behind this, frankly, a whole slew of stuff that was about quotas. AI setting quotas, and it was mainly targeted at warehouse workers, where an AI might set a quota and all of a sudden you're like, they could pick 12 an hour or 14 an hour or 80 an hour. You're like, I'm not a cyborg. And so the states were dealing with legislation on that front. They were also dealing, I saw legislation on AI setting work schedules. So it's coming from like all these different directions, but it's all use case specific. So my advice is to kind of find a law firm that's keeping track of all of these things, and just, kind of actually read their messages. Don't let them go to the junk file, read them. And I think the federal government, when they get their house in order, they will catch up and start harmonizing some of this stuff. They are also very much keep an eye on Europe because we tend to just copycat what Europe does. They're good. So.
Sania or Nadia, would you like to chime in? Is there anything that's coming up at this point?
I think it's all clear. It comes down to how close, because you mentioned, Dr. Miller mentioned that, well, the US copycats the EU, great, but I'd love all this to be, all of them working together, because at the end of the day, the more scattered, the more difficult it will be to enforce the laws in real life, right? So I would love to see that happening.
Since we've we've spoken about compliance, about regulations that we're aware of and not aware of, as the poll reveals. The maximum number of people here are not fairly aware of the kind of regulations that exist in their area. So what, and Nadia, we can start with you. What do you think are the most significant risks associated with AI? And if it's applicable with AI specifically in HR, and how can we mitigate them?
Thank you for this question. This is a very good question, and I'd like to do an intro here. Most of the tools that I see in terms of AI, but also HR professionals, they keep selling AI as, oh, it gives us data. So based on the data, we can make database decisions. That means that the decisions will be unbiased, okay? Well, that sells well, this statement. And of course, you have data, you're able to make more informed decisions, right? Better decisions in general. But then the thing is that we always have to look at the data, where it really came from, and whether the data itself was biased, because we have to keep one thing in mind, that AI knows everything that it's been fed by us human beings, right? So far. And here, because of this, although we'd love to believe that, well, AI, machine learning, all of this helps us really to make better informed decisions, right? We still have to keep in mind that there are threats, that there are risks that we always have to take with a grain of salt, and ask ourselves whether something maybe seems off. That happened to me multiple times, actually, because I play with many AI tools, and sometimes I get some responses and I literally have conversations with AI saying, I think that you're wrong here. Could you double check on these results, because something's off? And sometimes the tools come back to me and they say, well, you're right, I actually omitted this or that, right? So you always have to use your brain to begin with. And that being said, with the risks, as mentioned before, very briefly, bias and discrimination, for sure, this is a very big problem, right? So if HR professionals basically just rely on tools without any human touch, it may become very dangerous, right? In this case, also, we know examples from the past how AI discriminated individuals. For example, there was this big, I would say, situation with Amazon, right, where they had their AI-driven hiring model. And then it happened that it favored male candidates for technical roles, right, just because of historic data. Also, another concern, risk, can be privacy and data security, that has already been mentioned, and the liability, right? The liability of individuals or corporations, as I mentioned before, and consequences of AI's actions, right? Because the consequences of AI's actions, as I mentioned, they will fall on individuals, companies, organizations, right? Those that actually develop, deploy, or use these AI systems. So it's very important to approach it this way, that I am still using my knowledge, my expertise, or the expertise, as has been mentioned here, of a professional law firm specializing in this as well, to double check and also to read everything, all the policies, even the terms and conditions when you buy, for example, a new tool, to understand that you won't be able to say, oh, it was the tool, it wasn't me. No, this is how you use the tool as an individual, because the tool can't be liable. Maybe the developers, for example, right? But not the tool itself. You can't blame everything on AI. That's what I'm trying to say. And so another aspect is over-reliance on AI, right? It is not this way that AI can replace everything here just like that, because these AI-driven decisions, they must be balanced with human judgment, right? And so we shouldn't use it to replace human decision-making, especially that when we look at many of the tools, then we will see that many AI systems, they operate as black boxes, and it makes it very difficult for us to understand why they have come to certain decisions, to certain conclusions, which means that there is a lack of transparency, right? And then HR professionals should be able to defend these AI-driven decisions, right? Rather than just blindly relying on them. And so if they understand what exactly they're willing to achieve, what they're looking for, use AI as a tool that will help them get to the conclusions that they are able also to justify because of a transparent process, they will be able to streamline the processes from this perspective as well.
there's also, since you started by talking about bias and discrimination, of course, there's a really big risk. There's also a question in the chat, and we will take questions later, but I would love to know how you would answer this, and Sania and Dr. Miller can feel free to chime in. There's a question that says, bias is not always bad, as it helps us to make sense of the world. How to distinguish between good and bad bias?
Well, it depends if it is harmful or not, right? So, and if bias leads to discrimination, or if bias gives someone the benefit of doubt and gives someone a chance, right? So this is an ethical question, and I don't think that there is a one-size-fits-all response. I'd love to hear the opinion of others.
Yeah, I agree with Nadia as well. I think sometimes, like you mentioned, we have data that comes into a system based on all of our previous decisions that we've made in the past. But those decisions are made by humans who have human judgment, who are biased essentially. And so are we plugging in bad data with our biased data in here, or are we just plugging in human data? And I think it really comes down to what is the bias about?
Yeah, I really can't add to that. I mean, you nailed it.
Yeah, agreed. Great. So now that we've discussed risks, it'll be great to also talk about risk management and what kind of frameworks or tools or what actionable strategies can you recommend that? And Sania, we can again start from you here, just to help minimize these risks.
So I think a great question, because risk management is crucial for successful implementation of AI in HR especially. So if we are proactive in identifying and mitigating those potential risks, then organizations have a win-win, right? They'll be able to deploy the AI software effectively, ethically, in a way that benefits both employees and the business. And so some of those considerations, I would say, is, of course, ensuring that the AI is used fairly and equitably to avoid biases, like we just mentioned, discrimination that might be in the underlying data. And some things to think about are, if you are an organization and you are deploying these AI and integrating them within your organization, create an AI ethics board. That would help to develop a countrywide training program on AI ethics as well. It would get a perspective on others in the field and how they would go about creating this board and what ethics looks like for them. And lastly, really engaging employees in the discussions about AI's role within the organization. Something else that I also want to mention here is data privacy. So the PII that you have in your organization, you want to protect that sensitive employee data and complying with the relevant regulations. There was a report from Microsoft and LinkedIn from a few months ago, which found that 3/4 of workers were using AI at work without their boss's okay. So again, that company-wide training is really important, because we want to make sure that, we're saying experiment with AI, see how it can help you with productivity, but then we're not setting guardrails. And what if someone, in good faith, but sends in their company data into a ChatGPT? Like, that's not great. So making sure that data privacy guardrails are in place. Another thing to talk about is bias in the algorithms. So making sure that you identify and address any biases to prevent unfair outcomes. And maybe that's setting up a dashboard that tracks performance and impact and conducts regular AI audits. And lastly, like I talked about a little bit before, the idea of job displacement. So planning for potential job changes and providing support for those affected employees. figuring out what are the skills that they have today, what can they upskill and reskill into. And that way you could do some strategic workforce management, so that you don't have to have mass layoffs within your company, but rather you can redeploy your human capital responsibly. So those were some of the high level things that I was thinking about in terms of risk management.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. And before we move on to kind of talk about the future, for everyone who's here, there are a couple of documents that might be helpful. Just a really quick note. We have one document that we built for a previous conference, which is on questions to ask your vendor, your AI vendor, around bias, around how they train their models. This is also something that Dr. Miller mentioned earlier in the panel. We'll be putting that link in the chat box. And we have a resource that we will this time, which is around tools that you can use for data privacy specifically. So you can also go and have a look at that and think about what Sania said about certain frameworks and certain steps that you can implement at work. You'll kind of fall in place with that. Cool. So as we know, regulation is not exactly a static thing, and neither is AI. And we are constantly kind of in flux. So just to think about what future regulatory developments we anticipate and how our audience here can be prepared for it. Dr. Miller, do you have any predictions? Do you have any sort of recommendations for that?
Yeah, again, I think the states are really where we want to keep our eye on regulation right now. And they are, God love them, they're doing a patchwork of different things. And so you have to be, first of all, they're addressing data big time. But they are addressing use case specific issues. And they show up, like when they do facial recognition laws, that will start showing up in different use cases in different ways. It could be in your timekeeping system and the way people kind of clock in based on if you have it set up that way, or it could be monitoring their movement around your, security perimeter, who knows? So you just kind of have to pay attention to these state laws. The other thing I would keep an eye out for, this one's interesting, is the deep fake stuff is really perking right now, mainly for election integrity, but we are seeing some aspects of people using this when they get a little disgruntled. So we used to hear about postal workers, and now we're just hearing about like people making deep fakes of like their boss. That can be very embarrassing. So those types of laws, which means as soon as you start to see these laws like hit the legislative agenda, you need to start thinking about, do we need policies around this? What does that need to say? And so it's not necessarily if the law actually gets published, it's all right, I'm seeing this. This probably is an issue. Now, what do we do about it before it even gets here? So I'd say deepfake is a good one because it's coming in a big way. And then just disclosure is another one. Do you have to disclose to your employees or to others whether you're using AI, whether AI has been used on you? To what extent was AI used on you, or are you going to use it on someone else? Those are just some of the forward-looking things that I see among many others. But again, I'd find a law firm. I don't work for them, but Holistic AI, I think they have a public tracker that where you can kind of monitor, and I think you can sort by HR law.
Perfect. So before we kind of conclude, I think I would love to take some questions that people have written in the Q&A tab. And since we were talking about state specific and how every region has their own regulations, there's a question partly hypothetical around what policies can be rolled out across geographies to ensure ethical usage. I think the question is essentially about what are some things that are unchangeable when it comes to ethics and AI. So any of you would like to take that? You can also look at the Q&A tab where all the questions are written, but please do look after like 11:15 a.m. because the ones before that are performance management. While you think about that, I think we can take on another question, which is a little more relevant to HR. And it says, empathy is a pivot on which we balance the fulcrum of HR. How can empathy be introduced in AI endeavors? This is we always get something around empathy in HR.
I can take a stab at this one. Something that I keep coming back to is AI plus humans, right? So the way to work together in the future will be the combination of both, right? Utilizing the empathy that humans have, our structured thinking, our unique creativity skills, everything that makes us human, and then leave all of the, analyses and big data, the brainstorming, those things, the note taking, right, to AI. And so that is, I think, the future forward, a best case scenario, to really have the empathy from the humans coming in, but also using AI to its fullest advantage.
Okay, let me offer one other concept for empathy. When we hear answers from a machine, from a human, from anywhere, we always kind of want to know, well, why? So if someone says, I'm breaking up with you, the first, well, why? Was it me? Is it you? Do you not like my hair? We want to know why. So I said a couple of times about explainability statements and checking them. Our explainability statements are in my opinion, a big portion of how we connect empathy with these systems. Because empathy means, I know you might not like this. I want you to understand how this works. Let me help you through this. And rather than, the ICO did a great report on explainability statements, and it says, don't fire hose them at the end or at the beginning. Dribble that stuff all the way through, because people are humans. They absorb in little goldfish, 7-second pieces. And so if you handle the explainability the right way, with the right tone and the right features, that can help a lot with empathy from these systems, especially when they're making critical decisions about people's livelihoods or, careers.
I'd also add one more thing, because we see this narrative on the market that AI will replace everyone literally, which is absolutely not true, because of many reasons. Now, empathy, this is an emotion. We as human beings are emotional creatures. And the reason why here we work together with AI, right? It's because AI can't read our emotions, which is why AI won't be able to make decisions based on empathy, because empathy is something that's unique to people. And that's exactly like both of you said and explained before. So it's us working with then AI and doing the automation, helping us do the work. But then at the end of the day, us as human beings will have these emotional factors because we are all people. We are not machines. And also maybe one more thing I'll add to the previous question, because I was thinking about it for a moment, what policies could be rolled out. So definitely everything that refers to data privacy and security. So I am thinking, for example, about the recruitment process. Now, when we look at recruitment processes worldwide, then one of the things, so when we start with the employee journey from the very beginning, to start even implementing consents so that candidates are aware that their data is being processed thanks to AI, right? The possibility to withdraw their consent equally for employees. All of this is something to begin with, because it's also, for example, in Europe, in line with GDPR as well. So there has to be transparency, and I would definitely start with policies. If a company already uses AI tools, the transparency referring to what are these tools being used for, and how does it affect you as an employee, and what you can do about it. And this is how I would start and dig deeper.
That's really helpful. And what you said about empathy was also very insightful. Thank you so much, Nadia. I think we have to wrap up the session now. So I would love a quick one piece of advice from each one of you, something that you'd give to all our HR audience here, and just advice to navigate this ethical, regulatory, compliance-ful world of AI.
I can just get started here. I would say, and I mentioned this a little bit before, and it was also mentioned in the first panel as well, but I would say involve employees in discussions about AI integration. They know their work best. They know whether an AI would be helpful or if humans can do this better. And this really helps in addressing their concerns and helps provide, the invaluable insights that could lead to better decision making about AI deployment. So I would say get everyone on board at the table.
What I'd add to this is for sure educate, because I've seen many companies saying they ban the use of AI because it's dangerous, period. And then what employees do, they do it on their own still, not even understanding the possible repercussions of all this. So, and this is because there is no training. So at the end of the day, you can't resist this change. So educate, broaden people's horizons, and spread awareness about how that can help and be their friend, and also how to use it wisely.
And I would say this is exhausting. If you're feeling exhausted, gotcha. It's exhausting, but please stay curious. Just please stay curious. And I heard on a podcast, and I wish I could contribute or attribute this to the person who said it. AI is not the goal. AI is a means to an end. So keep that in mind.
Brilliant. That was great. Get everyone on board at the table, train everyone. It's exhausting, but stay curious. Great way to sum up the panel. Thank you so much again, Sania, Nadia, and Dr. Miller. This was really illuminating and very, very grateful to have you here. I'm sure the audience, as you can see, had a lot of takeaways from this.